was to relive nostalgic moments of his school life at Combermere. In my capacity as principal political advisor, I had my fair share of Combermere bombardment. For example, in discussing the composition of boards of management of several statutory corporations and other parastatal agencies, he and I would meet late into the night so we could settle a list of recommendations, a list of names for recommendation to Cabinet. Next morning, I would receive an email with respect to the said board, but the name would be changed. On several occasions, I would ask, but why? And his legendary half smile and chuckle, he would say, you don't worry about that. I can vouch for the person. After careful examination of these unexplained phantom substitutions, I realized that in 99% of the cases, a Combermerean was inserted. So thereafter, to avoid this clash, whenever a recommendation was sought, I would write in bold at the bottom of the list, quote, a Comerian, C-A-W-M-E-R-I-A-N, end of quote. Let's just say that on that score, PM Thompson and I live happily ever after. Nothing depressed, while at the same time passionately motivated David Thompson more than an international study done a few years ago, which touted his rural constituency of St. John as not necessarily the most affluent in Barbados. While in opposition, all the chief would say to me is, quote, my day will come, end of quote. On becoming Prime Minister, the chief would make a point after his every tour of projects underway in St. John to call and declare at the top of his voice, quote, tell them to do their study now. Tell them to go up to Poolan. Tell them to go down to Bath. Let them tour Gall Hill Pavilion. Wait till they see what we're going to do at Venture, College Savannah, and Martins Bay. End of quote. David Thompson was emotional about the development of St. John and took the welfare of its inhabitants very seriously. Some may even say personally. He was determined that under his watch, St. John's time had come. So what is the legacy of he whom we mourn and honor this morning? He will not be recalled for erecting monuments or for being the longest serving this or that. He was never afforded time for either. In any event, it was not within his character to acclaim David Thompson. It was more in his character to glorify Barbados. His mantra is summed up in one of his most memorable statements, quote, I hope my legacy will be how I was able to bring the parts together in such a way as to create a safe, harmonious, inspirational, economically sound, fair, just, democratic, and compassionate nation. End of quote. For his efforts and accomplishments in this regard, he receives full marks. His view that Barbados is more than an economy, it is a society, dictated his DLP government's priorities: empowerment of ordinary people. The chief believed that by building relationships in communities and giving them the authority to look after each other through constituency councils, we could create a more aware people, a more caring, more effective society. This was reinforced through the emphasis he paid to families and family life. It was he who introduced the concept of families first, and it was he who placed in a cabinet of Barbados for the first time a minister of family. And our Prime Minister lived family. His own conduct as son, husband, and father was exemplary. He was known as a provider, and he offered to his daughters an arm on which to lean, an ear with which to listen, and a voice with which to reason. In a society where male symbols are missing from the household, he was determined to promote the value of the father and the husband, hoping that as an object of imitation, others would follow. He was often seen with his own children in public, and took every opportunity to encourage young people to get involved in, among other wholesome activities, music, sport, and scholarship. Therefore, by both precept and example, the chief paved the way for Barbados to be a kinder, gentler place to live, work, and enjoy. When our school children came under the threat of the minibus culture, it was he who said they must be protected, even if it meant that they should travel free of cost on public transport. In his budget speech of 2008, he immediately adjusted the rate of national assistance payable to the more than 3,000 children dependent on the state. It was he who said that the long summer holidays could put our children at risk with far too much spare time, and that while privileged children could afford to pay for summer camps, all children should be given an opportunity to access the skills training and sports activities which these camps offered. It was he who would spontaneously drop in on institutions which cared for the marginalized of society, be it the physically challenged, the addicted, or the aged. He wasted no time after the election in reviewing grants made to the disabled, increasing them both for the minimum disabled as well as the severely disabled. He made certain that the social safety net was sufficiently strong and flexible to ensure that our people, especially the most vulnerable among us, did not slide back into poverty. He introduced the concept of philanthropy capital, announcing the formation of the Foundation for Corporate Social Responsibility and Philanthropy, providing a regime for members of the diaspora and wealthy friends of Barbados to invest in a tangible way in the enhancement of communities, the development of named charities, and improvement of health facilities. It was he who would appear unannounced at football, cricket, or basketball encounters as far as Checker Hall, St. Lucie, St. Christopher Christ Church, Bayfield, St. Philip, but particularly in his beloved St. John, showing personal interest in the pursuits of the young by inquiring after their welfare. He was the #1 fan of St. John's Sonnets, paying close attention to the growth of individual players and looking after their families. His first ministerial portfolio in the 90s was culture, and he seemed never to have abandoned it. He recognized the potential for the cultural industries to be money spinners for Barbados and sought to foster them. He was one never to miss calypso tents and judge lyrics not for their support or opposition to his government, but by the use of language and double entendre. An issue very near and dear to the heart of David Thompson, but which he did not live to realize, was that of full integration of the diaspora into everyday Barbadian society. He was highly disappointed that ill health prevented him from attending and outlining his vision to the inaugural Barbados Network Conference in August of this year. The chief anticipated creating a Barbadian experience in which resident and non-resident Barbadians would truly embrace each other and value their respective contributions to the growth and success of this country. Our late Prime Minister sought to be a unifying force and promoted the need for all Barbadians to see themselves as Barbadians first, whether they lived here or not, whether they were Dems